Track to find solutions.
Go! The season reached the halfway mark with the Ford Motorrad Limpopo 400 in Polokwane, which broke new ground for South African off-road racing. The event incorporated a round at the FIA Cross Country World Cup and gave Nissan their third production vehicle win in 4 outings for the season via Duncan Foss and Ralph Pitchford in the proudly South African Nissan Navara. Victory gave Fossa, former South African Drivers' Champion, and Pitchford, the reigning co-drivers' champ, their first success of the season, with the pair coming home 7 minutes ahead of the factory Ford Racing Ranger, our former champions Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer. For their part, Woolridge and Scholthammer were 2.5 minutes ahead of third-placed Mark Corbett and Jean Moore in the Century Property Development Nissan Navara after an impressive display first time out in the vehicle. This pair were ahead of the Ford until a bare 5 or 6 kilometers from the finish when they picked up a puncture. For all the front-runners, matters were made a little easier with the demise of current championship leaders Hannes Grobler and Francois Jordan in their South African Nissan Navara, and Castrol Toyota Hilux crews Bevan Bertolt and Robin Houghton and Mark Ronier and Chris Birkin. All three went out with front suspension maladies, and the 3 retirements took the pressure off Foss and Pitchford and Woolridge and Scholthammer. Fourth overall and Class E winners were KwaZulu-Natal crew Manfred Schroeder and Ward Huxtable in the Works Diesel Ford Racing Ranger. They were ultra-consistent, and Schroeder is known as a man who nurses his vehicle around even though he manages to get the best out of it too. It was an impressive performance by the pair, who came in 2 minutes ahead of Class D winners Chris Visser and Jaapie Baardnost in the Tyco Trucks Toyota Hilux, who completed the top 5 placings. Second in Class D went to former Class E champions Jaap and Hugo de Bruin in the Castrol Toyota Hilux. In a tight finish, the De Bruins were only 55 seconds behind the reigning Class E champions, with Cliff and Louis Weichelt third in the Bosel Toyota Hilux. The gap between Schroeder and Huxtable and Jannie Visser and Yorks Leroux in a Toyota Hilux in Class E was a sizable 5 minutes. And then there was a whopping 30 minutes plus between Visser and Leroux and third-placed Fabio Tofani and Mike Barron in the Club Refrigeration Toyota Hilux. An elusive victory for Gary Bertold and Henry Costain in the Atlas Copco Porter was the feature of the special vehicle category. Bertold and Costain in their first outing in the brand new Porter were handed victory when race leaders Alfie Cox and Henny Terstegen picked up 2 punctures virtually within sight of the finish line. It was Bertold's long-awaited win, with the Atlas Copco pair nearly 4 minutes ahead of Cox and Terstegen, with the second Motorrad Bat crew Evan Hutchison and Akim Bergman a further 20 seconds back in third place. Cox was again piling on the pressure and making his way up the championship log. Marsh and Whitehouse and the Nashua Mobile Bat were also consistent as ever. They were fourth and maintained their 100% finish record for that season, with Colin Matthews and Jannie Erasmus in the Gondwana Steel Bat completing the top 5. Jan and Hendrik Kraai in the Keymax Bat won Class B after a steady drive. For a team only in their first year of national off-road racing, it was an impressive performance, finishing half an hour ahead of second-placed Marius van Vieren and Johan Kutsia in the Bosel Zarco. Third in Class B was Swaziland's finest John Thompson and Clinton McNamara in a Zarco Light, with the pair holding off the Adenko Bat crew of Bez Besaidnout and Johan de Bruin in a very tight finish. Botswana crew Gary Gillingham and Peter van Vieren in the Shell BMW Raceco scored their first Class S victory with a dig-down deep gutsy performance. They were around 11 minutes ahead of reigning champions Richard Schilling and Chris Davies in the Plastotech Aceco, with the 2 crews the only Class S finishers in a very tough event. And still, the veteran Schilling made it very difficult for the youngsters behind him in the Plastotech Bat. But eventually the line honours did go to Duncan Foss, a former South African champion and himself a fitness fanatic who certainly gets the job done. This time it was a 7-minute winning margin. And the special vehicle category, Bertolt and Costain with a big victory. But Cox and Tersteger right on their tail at the end, and Hutchison and Bergman made it a 2-3 for the Motorrad crew. At the top of the championship board at the halfway mark, there was only 4 points in it, as Grobler and Jordan and Woolridge and Scholthammer battled at the top. And in the space frame vehicles, it was a tie, Cox and Tersteger, and defending champions Marsh and Whitehouse, both on 53 points, Harkus and Trethewey within touching distance. Round 5 of the ABSA Off-Road Championship, the Lesotho Sun 400 lived up to its billing and produced the tightest finish of the season in the production vehicle category. The proudly South African Nissan Navara pair of Hannes Grobler and Francois Jordan scored their 3rd win of the season ahead of the factory Castrol Toyota Hilux of Mark Cronje and Chris Birkin and the Works Ford Racing Ranger of Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer, but only 7 minutes separated the top 3 teams. Cronje and Birkin in the Toyota and Woolridge and Scholthammer in the Ford were swapping the lead at one stage or the other, but a puncture finally put paid to the Toyota crew's hopes of a win, while suspension and steering problems slowed Woolridge and Scholthammer down drastically. 4th position overall and in class went to Bevan Bertolt and Oki Fourie, standing in for the injured Robin Houghton in the 2nd Castrol Toyota Hilux. It was a good recovery from the pair, who had to start from the back of the field, and to top that, both the Works Toyotas finished the same race for the first time this season. It was a crucial moment for them. A tough rocky route that rekindled memories of the legendary Roof of Africa rally saw to it that the race turned into a long day for vehicles in Class D and E. Chris Visser and Jaapie Baardnost in the Tyco Trucks Toyota Hilux won the Class D battle after simply outstaying the rest of the opposition. Early class leaders Cliff and Louis Weichelt in the Mosel Toyota Hilux finally succumbed to a broken suspension, and that handed a 2nd successive win to the Visser-Baardnost combination, and elevated Yuri and Arnold Duplessis in the BB Auto Nissan Hardbody into 2nd, their best finish of the season. With Manfred Schroeder and Ward Huxtable having a miserable event in the Works Ford Racing Ranger, the Class E honours went to the Bosel Toyota crew of Mark and Stuart Moffat. A string of mechanical maladies finally saw Schroeder and Huxtable time-barred, and the Moffats cruised in over half an hour ahead of Thomas Rundle and Brian Roberts in the Barden Tyre Services Nissan Hardbody. For Rundle and Roberts, it was their best result of the season, with the pair coming in 8 minutes ahead of Brian Martin and Henny Vosloo in the Castrol Toyota Hilux. The Motorrad back team completely dominated the special vehicle category on the Lesotho Sun 400, round 5 of the championship, which ended at Matsieng near Maseru. Alfie Cox and Henny Tersteger took the overall and Class A honours ahead of teammates Evan Hutchison and Akim Bergman by less than a minute after an intriguing battle at the front of the field. The Motorrad rout was completed when Brandon Harkus and Alex Saley came in 4th behind the Rapsa bat of Nardis Alberts and Colin Hunter. From mid-season on, the writing was on the wall. The Motorrad lads would make it very difficult for the other crews to come through. When Clint Gibson and Mike Brown in the Absolute Bat came in 5th, it gave the South African designed and built bats a clean sweep of the first 5 positions. The bat domination, however, did not tell the full story of a dramatic battle up front. On a tough route that took its toll, there was never more than a minute between 1st and 2nd throughout the 300-kilometre loops that made up the race. At the end of the first 2 laps, Hutchison and his navigator Bergman led Cox and Tersteger, with Alberts and Hunter chasing, with pole position pair Harkus and Sally falling a minute or 2 adrift after picking up punctures. And at DSP, there still wasn't a heck of a lot to choose between all these fine races, and they tasted to the limit cars. Some sharp navigation work by Tersteger finally put him and Cox in the driving seat on the final lap, but Hutchison and Bergman had other ideas, and at one stage shortly before the finish were within nudging distance of their teammates. It was the first win of the season after 2 second places for them, and all 3 Motorrad crews had now recorded victories for the season, with Nick and Ryan Harper winning the Toyota 1000 Desert Race. It meant that Bat Entries had won 4 out of the season's first 5 races. Alberts and Hunter came up with a workmanlike performance for 3rd place. And the same could be said of Gibson and Brown, with Will Battershill and Reg Sutton also performing solidly for 6th overall. In what was a tremendous performance, veterans Ernest Corbett and Warwick Goosen won Class B and finished 7th overall in the Century Property Development Spat. They, in turn, had nearly an hour to spare over Benz Besaidnout and Johan de Bruin and their Adenko bat, with Marius van Vieren and Johan Coetzee third in the Bosel Zarco. Nothing much went right for championship leaders Jan and Hendrik Kraai in their Keymax bat though. The father and son combination managed to salvage some very valuable championship points by limping home in 4th place. Sheer perseverance saw Nick Gosler and Gerard Niemand standing in for Richard Carolyn win Class S in the Kopanang Hotel Super Team Race Go. Championship leaders Richard Schilling and Chris Davies piloting the Plastotech Aceco, and nearest rivals Archie Rutherford and Craig Doubtfire in the second Dasho Mobile Race Go both fell by the wayside, with Gosler and Niemand grinding out a great result for them. Most notable of the Class A retirements was the demise of reigning SA champions Terence Marsh and Mike Whitehouse in the Nasho Mobile Bat. A gearbox malfunction saw them sidelined for the first time in an amazing 13 starts. Just 52 seconds separated Cox and Testecher from their teammates at the top of the board, while Corbett and Goosen started their late run for the Class B championship by being 7th. In the production car classes battle, there was yet another win for Grobler and Jordan, and a season's best place for Mark Renier and Chris Birkin, who only had more than a minute over Woolridge and Schulthammer. A run of 4 successive Nissan wins on the Sun City 400 was ended when Ford Racing Ranger pair Neil Woolridge and Kenny Schulthammer won the Sun City 400, with round 6 of the ABSA Championships run in sweltering conditions. Overall victory in the production vehicle category and the super production class gave the Ford team their 2nd win of the season and kept alive a fierce championship battle with Nissan. Woolridge and Schulthammer clocked in 13 minutes ahead of the Nissan Navara of Hannes Grobler and Francois Jordan to close the championship gap significantly between the two crews, with just 2 events remaining. It was an event loaded with controversy and drama. Ford produced a stunning performance when Manfred Schroeder and Ward Huxtable finished 3rd overall and 1st in Class E in the diesel-powered Ford Racing Ranger. The next Class E car was almost 70 minutes behind. And mid-season, the Fords were certainly making their presence felt. And whatever they say, this part of the world always presents a very tough challenge as far as the vehicles and the drivers are concerned. 2 punctures early in the race were the only problems encountered by the Ford pair, but Grobler and Jordan certainly used up some of their good fortune for the year when a steering arm broke within 100 meters of the finish, and the pair were just able to limp across the line with the front wheels pointing in totally different directions. 3rd in the SP class went to Bevan Bertolt and Robin Houghton in the 2nd Castrol Toyota Hilux, who held off Rob Gurney and Graham Steinbank in the 2nd Factory Ford Ranger, and Mark Renier and Chris Birkin in the 2nd Castrol Toyota Hilux, who lost time via punctures and a broken wheel rim. The Class D honours went to the father and son team of Hichu and Jaap de Bruin in a Castrol Toyota Hilux, with the tough route and the hot and dusty conditions taking its toll on the other fancied runners in the category. Harold and Tian Kun in a Landy were a surprise 2nd in class, with Chris Visser and Jaapie Baardnost in the Tyco Trucks Toyota Hilux. Father and son Cliff and Louis Weichelt in the Bosel Toyota Hilux, having races rather to forget. Manfred Schroeder and Ward Huxtable again had a trouble-free run to dominate Class E. It left the KwaZulu-Natal crew firmly in control of the Class E championship. Jannie Visser and Joks Leroux in their Toyota Hilux, and brothers Mark and Stuart Moffat in the Bosel Toyota Hilux entry trailed in 2nd and 3rd in a class that suffered a very high attrition rate. Meanwhile, Motorite Bat crews continued to dominate the special vehicle category in the ABSA Off-Road Championship with a 1-2, their 2nd such result in a row at the Sun City 400. Brandon Harkis, with victory making him the first 2-time winner this season, with Marcel Terthuis, eventually won a tight battle against teammates Alfie Cox and Henny Testecher. Off-road motorcycle legend Cox and his co-driver were looking for their 2nd win in a row, but finally ended up around 3.5 minutes behind Harkis and Terthuis. This, however, kept Cox and Tersteegen at the top of the overall and Class A championships. Harkes, who won the opening event of the year in a single-seater motorized bat in Darling in the Western Cape, did his Drivers' Championship hopes no harm with a win in what developed into a cat-and-mouse game between the two teammates and front-runners. Third in their best showing of the season were Clint Gibson and Mike Brown in the absolute bat. The KwaZulu-Natal pair were 20 minutes behind Cox and Tersteegen, but ran strongly all weekend in a race tinged with controversy. Toyota 1000 Desert Race pair Nick and Ryan Harper and the Cartec bat refused to start after they were one of several crews given an hour penalty after the Friday prologue to determine start positions. The Harpers, along with a number of other crews, were penalised for missing marshal points along the 63-kilometre prologue route. Hopes of a motorized bat clean sweep, though, were ended early on the first of two 200-kilometre loops when Hutchison and Bergman retired. They started the day with a gearbox that didn't feel happy and soon had to call it a day. Cox and his co-Tersteegen and Harkes and Terthui arrived at the designated service point within seconds of each other after the first lap. A brake problem and a puncture then slowed Cox and Tersteegen, with Harkes and Terthui taking full advantage of the situation. Reigning champions Terence Marsh and Mike Whitehouse's National Mobile bat kept alive Slim Championship hopes by coming home fourth in Class A. They were behind Naim Mosaji and Rehan Bodyana in their TTR Jimco, who were then excluded from the results after a brush with Botswana crew Gary Gillingham and Peter van Vieren in the Shell Racing Raceco. Nick Gosler and Richard Carolyn in the Kopanang Hotel Super Team Raceco ground out the win in Class S. It was Gosler's second win in a row after his victory, partnered by Gerard Niemand in the Lesotho Sun 400. After the heat of the Northwest Province, it was Woolridge and Scholthammer who were on the top step of the podium and celebrating again. And it was joy for Ford as they took third as well. But Toyota continued to rack up the points for the manufacturer's trophy, which was residing in the Nissan display cabinet. And in the specials, it was another 1-2 for the motorized crew, who were certainly motoring the right way. The Ford victory closed the gap to Grobler Jordan considerably, and nothing seemed certain in the 2006 edition of the Production Car Championship. Only 8 points in it, and 2 races to go. And in the specials, Cox and Tersteegen had 15 points to play with over their teammates Harkes and Terthui, and the word was out, there were no team orders, each man for himself. And then they